Hello, listeners. Another Sunday here with my boy Tommy Blass. How you doing, buddy?
What's going on, everybody? How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing all right. Been an odd couple of weeks, actually. I feel like we kind of lost our routine a little bit because we recorded those episodes in advance before the vacation, and then we ended up skipping one, and then it just kind of like threw things off. And I was really hoping that our website would be finished by then, and it's just mentally with me. You know how I'm a planner, and I'm just disappointed. I was walking to get my Coors Lights, and I'm just like, life is just so disappointing.
Yeah. Well, it's like Thanos says, right? Reality is often disappointing. I think it's high time we got back on track.
We got to get back on the momentum and just assume the website's never going to be done. So at least when it is done, we don't have like disappointment. Did you hear that?
Yeah. What the hell was that?
I think it was my dog again. We're back on track, everybody. The dog's in the background.
Yeah. Doodle is making noise.
I was just walking to get the beers, and I'm like, I'm a little disappointed. Just in life in general. It's just life brings so many disappointments. And listeners, do you just realize that life just brings disappointments? It's ironic because life is such a beautiful thing, and yet it's just full of disappointments. Do you think we set ourselves up for disappointment? Do you think we just really hope for something so great that ultimately, no matter what most outcomes are, we're going to be slightly disappointed?
I think disappointment is sometimes inevitable when people hype themselves up to a certain degree. But I also think there's a fair amount of irony in disappointment sometimes when people are vehemently for or against something and then things kind of subvert their expectations. All of a sudden they look like a fool. And the ways that they try and scramble out of that is sometimes can be very entertaining.
Well, for others' entertainment, but not your own.
No, not your own usually. If you're ever backed into a corner and you've got some splaining to do, you can't do it without looking like an idiot. That's a position that sucks to be in.
Yeah, it's like with new people. Like actually not new people. It's like when business owners are, have their job listing out and they get an applicant that's like, oh, yay, finally got an applicant for my job that I'm paying a shitty wage at. And then they're just applying because they need to show unemployment that they're applying for jobs and they got the interview. But then it's just like, oh, well, I never got the job. Employers are setting themselves up for disappointment because they're not paying appropriately, and yet they're posting jobs, and then the people who need to apply for jobs are applying for the job, but they really don't want it because they're not paying enough, and then ultimately they're in disappointment. So it's the other people seeing the benefit of the humor of disappointing other people, not even knowing they're disappointing them. Like they don't know they're disappointing that employer.
Also, I want to touch on this real quick before I forget. With regards to the employers trying to find people, I love these signs on the internet that are going around all these restaurants and everything else, on the marquee where they normally talk about like whatever the specials are or something. They'll say, oh, well, now hiring people who actually want to work. And it's like, why would anybody actually want to work if you're going to make more money not doing that? Like the whole point of working is to make money to live your life. Like if you could just live your life and not make that money, I don't blame any single person for doing that. So, but regardless, I'm getting off track. The thing that's funny is then when these other places start offering better jobs and people take those jobs, and I've seen quite a few glow up stories online of people, who quit shitty jobs because or they were laid off from a shitty job or something happened that made them reevaluate their position at a given time. And so then they end up, floating some resumes out there and they get a job, at a better place or something like that. And they're making way more money. And they're like, oh yeah, I quit my shitty job at, as a fry cook at a fast food chain restaurant. And now I'm, after some training courses and things like that, now I'm, an insurance claim analyst or something like that. And, there you go. There's somebody who wants to work. And guess what? They had a little more time. With a little time on unemployment, they were able to actually devote the time to searching for it, figuring out what needs to be done and what they need to do in order to be applicable for that position. And they were able to advance. So the argument that people don't want to work is fundamentally, I think, not true. And it's funny to watch these corporations trying to wriggle out of it.
I think on the flip side of what's going to be kind of funny is when people who finally now want to get back to work because they do need the money and they're starting to apply for jobs that they do want. And then they finally get the interview. They think the interview goes great. And you're like, oh, yeah, that went really well. The person who interviewed me really liked me, blah, blah, blah. And they never get the call back. And now it's like, well, now it's back on you. So I think there's going to be some interesting karma going around, like when some of these employees looking for a job are trying to actually get back to work again, when it's like it's back on the employers that are like, you know what? I've had so many people schedule an interview, not show up or something along those lines. Now it's going to get back to a point where these people actually need the job and they're going, and then they're not even getting calls back. It goes both ways.
Yeah, that is kind of funny, like the way it works out sometimes. And then what ends up happening? The same thing. You're left looking like a dick, and now what? Now it's like, oh shit. Well, I thought I was hot shit, and now I'm not.
I have to tell you, Tom, the last 2 weeks we talked about the box, which I thought was a great concept for our listeners to have. And obviously we recorded the box part 1 initially, and then the box part 2. Personally, I'm the one who pulled the box part 1, and then we re-recorded part 1 and released it after part 2. I know that's very confusing, but there was a very interesting topic. And I always feel like we're somewhat a week ahead sometimes of what's going on. And a big portion of the box part 1 that we did not release was about the pro-choice, pro-life argument. And I believe that was something that it really should go in the box. And we talked about that. And Texas pulled some crazy shit the week after. Now I actually think it's a discussion that has to come out of the box because, you have a whole nother side of it where the Democrats are now mandating the vaccine for employment. I mean, it's a pretty crazy argument now, the whole pro-choice, pro-life, and the my body, don't tell me what to put in my body. It's like Republicans want to tell you what you can't take out of your body, and the Democrats want to tell you what you have to put in your body.
The funny thing about that is, both of those sides are essentially arguing for the same point, which is that when people can't collectively decide what is or isn't right to do with one's own body, that decision should default to the government. And I think a lot of left-leaning people, without realizing it, were kind of advocating for a government that has the power to make a decision like the one in Texas. But I think ultimately what it boils down to is it works in your favor as long as your party is in power. But as soon as the other party gets in power, so like with the Republicans in Texas, I think they're setting a dangerous precedent right now because if Texas flips blue, like a lot of people are actually predicting that it will, then what's to stop Texas from saying, oh, yeah, well, now you need to get vaccinated? And they can just lean on the precedent of like, oh, well, previously everybody thought it was okay that, we could outlaw abortion. And it's like, oh, shit. Well, now what do you do? Huh? Now who looks like the dick?
The best argument that I heard over Labor Day weekend was, and it's just a theory, that Texas did this because it was a state that was kind of turning blue. And now this is a way to defer those people from coming in. By creating this type of law, people who are very Democrat are not going to move to that state now because of this. They're not going to send their kid to college because of that type of law. And it's the younger generation, like people our age, Tom, that are very, very pro-choice who won't go to that state now. So it's going to stop people from going into that state that would vote Democrat. So it is a big deterrent for Democrats to move to that state. Because I think at the end of the day, every idiot knows if somebody's needs an abortion, they're going to get it. Whether it's 6 weeks or not, they're going to get it. They're going to go to another state and they're going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think this is a way to just stop the influx of people who vote blue all down the line to come into the state.
That's fair.
And I have to say, that's a pretty fair theory. I have to say that is a theory that I think could be true. They got together and are like, listen, we need to figure something out. Well, this will do it.
Yeah.
What's weird is that it was like backed. Didn't something like that need to be backed by the Supreme Court or something?
I'm actually not sure. I do know that I've heard that I thought it was the Biden administration is filing like a lawsuit against the government of Texas. And I don't know how the hell that actually works. I don't know if that's ever happened before.
It all goes on where you're going to force states then to implement some sort of rule where they have to get vaccinations. You're going to tell a state, well, you can't have that law about abortions, but yet, hey, every state figure out something so that everybody needs to get vaccinated. It is a very fine line, these two arguments, like the pro-life, pro-choice, and then this forcing vaccination and not getting vaccinated. They're such a close argument. They're like the same exact thing, and each, red and blue are on the opposite sides of each argument. It's pretty nutty.
Well, it's almost like horseshoe theory, right? They're, at the bottom of the horseshoe, the widest part, that's where they start to diverge. But the further away from each other they get, the closer they begin to mirror each other at the top of the horseshoe. My dumbass is making a horseshoe motion with my hands, like that's going to help explain. These two sides, they're coming at different positions, but they're coming at them from opposite angles that are so close to each other that they're almost arguing the other's point.
It's gotten to the point where the extreme conservatives are arguing, well, the science, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, you go to church every Sunday and pray to a God. What are you talking about science now?
Right.
It's just a very crazy thing. And they're polar opposite opinions that are technically the same thing. When you, like you said, the horseshoe effect, they're so different, yet they're the same. It's almost like we need to figure out who's in the middle. So all the middle people who are like, all right, well, I'm vaccinated, but I don't give a fuck if you are or not. Or listen, I'm a guy, I'm like pro-choice because I shouldn't have an opinion anyway. It's another girl's body.
Right.
We should find all those people so like we can be in our own little realm and let the people who are extremely left and extremely right go and fuck themselves and just have our little middle crew for the people who just don't care.
Right. Because at the end of the day, the major point of contention between both sides is just a lack of consistency. And I think you can be consistent. Part of being consistent means supporting ideas that you may not necessarily agree with, but they are ideas that are consistent with your principles. So if you believe, and this was a problem I had with a lot of the libertarians too. When I used to be a libertarian, was they would all be about like, oh yeah, bodily autonomy. You ought to be able to take whatever drugs you want. There ought to be a free market for drugs. Well, that's great. But then when it came to abortion, it was, oh, well, that violates the non-aggression principle because you're committing an act of aggression against the fetus. And it's like, yeah, but the fetus can't survive outside of the woman who's making the decision. So it's really that person's choice. And so that person with a uterus is in power of that decision, and the fetus in her uterus is not a person against whom an aggression can be made. And they would absolutely just like, no. Oh, what, you're advocating for killing babies? Where's it end? And it's like, well, it very clearly ends when they're born. But they fail to see the inconsistency of their own argument. And that's why I'm loath to call people like you and I, Chris, I'm loath to call us centrist, because I don't believe centrist is the right word. I believe a centrist is somebody who just kind of supports the status quo because they profit off of it. But like a rationalist, maybe. I don't know. I'm sure rationalist is already.
We should create our own party in a sense based off some of our views, because again, we're very opposite of each other on some things, but we find a middle ground to where it's like, because you and I, we're opposites, but we are bipartisan with our views. We figure out a way to just meet in the middle.
Right. And to be fair, just to make it 100% clear, we're both on the same side of this particular argument, though. Pro-choice.
Should be pro-choice. I can't stand a guy argues for pro-life. Like, shut the fuck up.
Right.
And again, there are some men who will fight that argument. It's like, shut the fuck up, dude. First off, the baby should be aborted just for the fact that it's your seed.
Yeah, we need less people like you. But the other thing I see happening a lot, and this is why I think we've both kind of been careful about how we're talking about it, because we both are in agreement that our opinion on this matter is kind of tertiary to the actual discussion. We can't, everybody's allowed to have an opinion on anything, but everybody's allowed to discuss their opinion on anything. But we, at the end of the day, are able to realize our opinions are our opinions, but what we think shouldn't really actually matter in the grand discussion of it all, because it's a woman's body, and our opinion of what a woman should be able to do with her body is just that we think she should be able to do what she wants with it. So when I do see a lot of people arguing about bodily autonomy now, and I sort of hinted at it in the last episode, but I just want to say it again. Like, I feel like a lot of people who are doing that. They're saying like, oh, well, bodily autonomy. I want to be able to take drugs. So a woman ought to be able to get an abortion. And I feel like that is also probably you're going in the right direction, I suppose. At least I agree with the direction you're going in that people should have ultimate sort of like control over what they do and don't do with their bodies. But to compare like getting pregnant and getting an abortion to like being able to buy acid legally and drop it, I think that's also a bit of a hairy comparison in context compared to obviously the opposite side of the argument. It's probably forgivable for now, but I would just maybe be aware that like you're talking about something a little more serious than just the concept of bodily autonomy. It's not something to be treated as lightly as like, I ought to be able to buy crack legally and do it because I have control over my own body. I think that's kind of a facile comparison.
I actually think all drugs should be legal. I am that kind of person where if someone does want to take drugs, let them do it. But I argue the legal battle portion of it, because at least if it is government monitored, perhaps there won't be as many laced shit. Because if you buy heroin from the government and there's too much fentanyl in it, then you'll be able to sue someone. You can't sue someone for giving you bad heroin on the streets. But if it's regulated and there's a company that is giving bad heroin, you're going to be able to sue that company. So that company is going to do whatever it can to make sure it's not giving you a bad dose.
Right. And I mean, you could treat it like you do anything else, really. I mean, if you get the FDA involved and there's standards put in place by which the purity of your drugs are measured, then I mean, I do think to totally contradict myself here, it's kind of the same thing in that if people want to do drugs, they're going to do them. If people want something, they're going to get it. So if people want to do drugs, they're going to be able to get them. So if they're going to get them anyway, and by outlawing them, all you're doing is creating a black market wherein the price of these things can go out of control, and people who are powerful enough to operate outside of the law with impunity are going to profit untold amounts of money. What was that? El Chapo? I mean, that guy was unfathomably rich, and the only real reason he was that way was because essentially there was just a lawless market with no standards, because the price was able to go as high as he wanted it to go because he controlled the distribution of it, and the government making it illegal made it so that he could just crush his competition and nobody could go to the government because they're all engaging in the same illegal activity. So I think legalizing it is definitely a step in the right direction. If you legalize drugs and you tax it, you make the money off it, the government can put that money towards education. Right?
Yeah. Okay. It's going to just go in people's pockets.
Well, but ideally, they would put it towards education and like actual like comprehensive drug education for just everybody, not even just like school kids, especially not something as stupid as like the DARE program that we went through, which was just an hour of indoctrination by a police officer where he says, how bad everything is. Like, no, the DARE program was one of the worst failures in sort of a drug education scenario that the government was trying to do to us at that time. And it was so rife with misinformation, and it was presented from the side of a police officer who's not exactly an impartial source when it comes to drugs. Yeah, he's just going to try and scare you away from it because he's a police officer. He's in a position of authority to do that. So,
you know what I would have done if I had an idea to like stop kids from doing drugs, but maybe like 3rd or 4th grade, I would have brought in a legitimate crack whore with missing teeth.
Yeah,
just scare the living shit out of everyone. I feel like there needs to be more realism.
That's the thing, though.
In drug use,
the DARE program was a scare tactic. It didn't work because scare tactics don't actually work. I understand they should work in theory, but they don't work. And so what actually works is not trying to compel people with a sense of fear, but trying to make them understand, like, hey, like, look, heroin, for example, heroin's legal. Like, you could do it in this scenario we're creating where it's all legalized, right? It's legal. You could do it, but here are are the risks? And like, always buy from, an approved vendor or something like that. I mean, and I do think that those things also need to be kept in check, because then you can get a company like, who's that family that made OxyContin? Sackler family. So you do need to, and that's where the libertarian side of things goes wrong, because you can't just let a market run without regulation. The government needs to be there to make sure that people like the Sackler family can't just get in there and be like, hey. But I also think legalizing drugs in general would have been a hindrance to prevalence of OxyContin and the overprescription of opioids in general. God damn it. I thought I turned off my ringer.
OxyContin. Oh yeah.
It's like that was the worst time to oh yeah, Macho Man. Come on.
Again, you make it so that abortions are harder to get. It's like making drugs harder to get. I mean, I'm not going to say abortion's a drug, but it's one of those things where people are going to find alternative ways to do it. So like when you don't have access to Coke, you go to something else that is probably not as good as Coke. It'll do the same thing, but it'll potentially make it worse. So now you're going to some doctor who's not really a doctor that's performing those things, or you're going out of state. I don't know if Texas is really, I'd really like to think the argument of just trying to keep it a red state is really where it goes. And they're really just not going to enforce it. It's just one of those things like, this is law, that's that. And it just, you'd like trying to make the Democrats not come into the state. I'd like to think that it was a well thought out thing, but then at the same time, there are men out there who really want to just have control over women's bodies, which goes to tell you something like that needs to change. And then we have a president that's also trying to tell us what to do with our bodies by forcing something in us. You have one side telling you you can't take something out, and then you have another side telling you, well, you have to put this in.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. The thing that the thing that made me kind of the dick in all this, where I felt like I was the one wearing egg on my face, was when Trump got elected originally. I remember, and maybe it wasn't originally. I don't remember exactly when the show came out, but it was around the same time. I remember people making comparisons between Trump being president and the start of The Handmaid's Tale, that show that's about, the corrupt government in which women are entirely subjugated, I guess, like as a sex as a whole. They're just like subservient to men. And I remember so many times when Trump would do anything, people were like, this is literally the start of A Handmaid's Tale. And I was like, God, like, Jesus Christ, like, come on. Like, first it's Harry Potter, now it's A Handmaid's Tale. Like, what example of fiction will be just the go-to knee-jerk default comparison next? And then this happened, and I'm like, holy shit, I kind of see it. Like, oh boy, yeah,
It makes you think that some of these Hollywood people person wrote Handmaid's Tale, right? So clearly they're getting some real insider conversation from someone who knows someone to really get an idea of what's going on. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to write something about this.
I think that was based on a novel, actually.
So the person that wrote that novel, if it was a novel, depending on when it was
85.
written, I mean, they must have 85. Fuck.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy, right?
Bill Gates must have been in a room, and he was talking about how probably around 2010, we're going to start creating this virus.
We're going to start with the swine flu, and then we're going to have a quick vaccination for that. And anybody who gets it, that's the litmus test. We got to gauge just how susceptible the American populace is at that point. And then we got to come out with a new strain of Ebola, and then we got to come out with the bird flu. Like, this is all on timeline.
All while passing fetuses with Christopher Reeve.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, though, it is very interesting, like on how on point some of these things are. I mean, Demolition Man, literally the epitome of kind of what's going on today with censorship. It is ridiculous how censored we are today. We're not getting fined for cursing yet. We're almost there, though. I'm pretty sure you say fuck in public, there's going to be a point where it's just like $10. I mean, even if it's $10, I'm fucked.
Well, yeah, I feel like, I guess it's just different words being censored now, because lately, man, I turn on regular, I mean, not cable, but like Hulu Live or something. And if it's like after 7:00, man, I'm hearing some shits. I'm hearing some goddams. I'm hearing some Jesus Christ. I'm like, wow,
Yeah. Well, remember they had to get rid of other words. So like notice how they don't say bitch that much anymore,
That's true. Yeah,
right? I
Jesse
mean,
Pinkman was the last one to really capitalize on that word.
on HBO Max, they have The Evil
Mhm.
Dead on there, the NC-17 version. They censored out the hand that's holding the girl's neck.
Are you serious? The hand that's
Yeah.
holding went Evil Dead. Is it the tree? Like the tree?
No, 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 no. It's the hand. Google the image. It's with the girl like kind of coming out of I don't know, the water or something like that, and the hand that's like choking her. That arm is gone. They photoshopped it out.
Wow. Yeah, boy, I
How
hate
not, dude?
that.
That I mean, like it's crazy how slowly things are getting censored, and they're just. That's why I own my shit. That's why I own my
Yeah.
stuff, and I got made fun of for it. But this is why I have like 1,000 DVDs because I have. First of all, they're going to be worth money one day because they're not going to make them anymore, and I have like 3 copies of The Evil Dead with the girl getting choked out, and I'm pretty happy about that now.
Somebody takes that clip out of context. I have 3 copies of the girl getting choked out. I'm happy now.
But no, seriously. I mean, does that mean that the next time they do like a Blu-ray edition, it's going to be a censored cover? Like, what are we doing?
Imagine they like try to edit all of the very controversial themes out of a movie like American History X, and it just starts out with like Edward Norton, and he like wakes up out of bed and he's like, "Well, I guess today I'm gonna," and then it just cuts to the credits.
No, it's American History Z, and it's him going to the tattoo parlor to remove his tattoos.
See, I could get behind that. That
Yes.
might be a feel-good movie. That's one of those ones that the movie announcer, when he's announcing it, he'd use a really high voice. Come share in a spectacle of redemption.
It's nuts. I mean, I rewatched The Sopranos again, and again, that's another show I'm glad I own the DVDs because I wonder how HBO is going to censor that show. I mean, that show is a little racist and it's a little sexist. As the world goes on, are they going to eliminate that? I mean, the show is blatantly racist and the show's blatantly sexist with characters who you're meant not
That's
to
just
like.
it.
The racism and the sexism is these are villains.
Right.
But are people going to say, oh, the writers wrote that, so they're the racist and sexist ones?
Well,
At what point can a character be written to be a racist or a sexist to where it's okay to have in a movie or a TV show to the point where it's going to, the writer's obviously racist and sexist to even create a character like that?
I think what it boils down to is, if it's sort of a storytelling device where it can show you sort of the ugly side of a community or something like that, or if it's an anti-hero who's espousing these beliefs, there is room for things like that if they're trying to add some level of like, just like with The Sopranos, for example, you have to like the way they were kind of trying to paint it all was it like the mob was against everybody. Nobody wanted to see Tony Soprano succeed. And he had his own fair share of enemies like within sort of his ranks himself. So to give him ideas like that, or like to give him attitudes like that, and the guys who are with him attitudes like that, obviously you're not meant to agree with them, but it's supposed to sort of elucidate the fact that they look at everybody as like an outsider, and like their only real sort of favorable idea of anyone is the people within their own sort of group.
The Many Saints in Newark movie comes out, I think, October 1st. And that is a prequel to The Sopranos, like I think 30 years before season 1 of The Sopranos. Obviously, that was during a time where people were slightly more racist than they were at the beginning of The Sopranos. So you're going to see how that's written to see how censored the writing is now with the time. Because if that movie was created before the start of The Sopranos, it would be written much differently than it is probably going to be written today. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to hear certain things that we would have heard if this movie were written way back when. So to me, it's going to be a censored Sopranos movie.
I could see your point in that. Yeah, there probably are some things that people would have said back then that maybe they're going to try and gloss over in the movie. Maybe they'll toss them in once or twice or whatever, just to be like, yeah, see, we went there. There is a level where it's like gratuitous, and it's not always even. I think nowadays people just have a little more of an idea of like how things might hold up in the future. And so there's things where, there's things that were made in the 90s, for example, that use slurs and whatever. And like, in the 90s, maybe it was just seen as like a little edgy, or it's like, ooh, like this is being real. Like, this is how a guy like this would really talk or something. And then you fast forward to like 2021 and you're watching something like that and you're like, okay, like that was a little much. And I guess the two sides of that argument is like, okay, but that, you have to look at it respective of its time, or, well, it's not necessary. I'm of the side where I don't think it's as necessary. But as long as there's nothing being glorified or promoted in a positive light, then it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like Quentin Tarantino. He's probably very smart by saying he's only doing one more movie, because technically majority of his movies are outdated now. Pulp Fiction came out today. That's a big problem. Reservoir Dogs comes out today. That's a big problem. But Pulp Fiction would be a problem.
Well, yeah. Pulp Fiction is kind of one of the ones I was thinking of. And like, don't get me wrong, I never really saw the appeal with Pulp Fiction, but I'm not trying to be that guy who's like, well, I never got it. I personally never saw it, but I'm not going to fault anybody who does or whatever. But there.
You've never seen Pulp Fiction?
I saw it. I never saw the appeal in it, I'm saying.
I see.
I saw it also at an age probably older than most people saw it. I didn't see it until like, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, which, the movie came out a long time ago. The movie came out almost 30 years ago now.
Yeah, 94, I think.
So, when I saw it, it was, maybe I just wasn't as impressionable or whatever. But yeah, there's a couple parts of that movie where I feel like they don't necessarily hold up as well, and they almost kind of like cheapen the rest of the movie, which, the idea of like many plot lines running together and intersecting and just this sort of frantic pace of everything, I thought was done really well. And yeah, there's some parts of that movie where I'm just like there's Tarantino jacking himself off again. And that's not to say I don't think he's a good director. He is a good director. He just like, he knows he's a fucking good director, and he won't forget to remind you that he knows.
Well, he does know he's a good director, and I think he's gotten to the point where he's like, well, I guess I got to be done. First off, there's arguments that he knew what Harvey Weinstein was doing. So like he must know better. It's like, dude, you got to take a step away from it now.
I think he probably has a couple things that he might be worried about that are probably causing him to make that decision. But also, I wonder if he's not just saying this to gauge what the reaction is going to be, like what the public is going to say. And like maybe when his next movie comes out, he's going to drop it, and it'll go in a completely different direction than all his other movies. And then he drops it, and then he just kind of waits behind the curtain like, well, what's the audience doing? Like, if the reception is really good, I think he might be like, oh, what's that? You want an encore? Well, okay.
I think he's going to do I think he's doing a TV show. He's going to be doing whatever Leonardo DiCaprio played in that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's going to do like a 7-episode series. And I think he's going to do a slasher film. He's going to go horror.
Now, see, horror, I feel like, has gotten a big resurgence in popularity, and that's good because I love horror as a genre. It might be my favorite. I love the idea of him doing horror, I guess, because he is good at like being campy without being too campy. So I think his brand of horror still holds up.
Yeah, as long as Eli Roth isn't involved. I know like he founded Eli Roth, so hopefully he takes a step back and doesn't have any pointers from him, because he'll just be putting him in the wrong direction. And hopefully he's smart enough and good enough of a writer to realize that. God.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Okay, so I'm actually going to step back a little bit here, because Tarantino, as far as his recommendations for horror movies, as far as his official like endorsements, 2 thumbs up for horror movies goes, I know of 2, and they were both absolute duds. And the one was Eli Roth's The Green Inferno, which sucked. I mean, that movie just flat out sucked. It was not good. And it was so bad at points where it literally made me cringe to think that somebody wrote this and then filmed it and then had actors act it out. And the other movie that he suggested, what was it, Green Room?
Green Room was good.
What?
You need to watch it a second time.
I don't think I could. I mean, what did I think it? No. Did I think it was the worst movie ever? No. Like, did it have some interesting parts in it, I suppose. But that's me being very generous with my description of it, because I would not describe it as a good movie, let alone great.
I will agree with you. Maybe you have a problem with Green. I bet you didn't like The Green Hornet with Seth Rogen either. No, that movie fucking sucked. No, listen, Green Inferno was terrible. That was the acting was beyond atrocious, and I think he had his wife in it again. So like it's like with Rom Zombie putting that Sherry O'Terry in like everything. He needs to stop putting his wife in movies. But Green Room was good. Like that gets my full endorsement, and you need to watch it a second time. If you watch that a second time, you're going to come back and say, you know what, that was really good. I think you were expecting something a little bit different. I oversold it, and I think I oversold it for myself too, but I did watch it a second time. And also that Anton Yelchin was alive, obviously, at the time, and he actually is a good actor. I feel bad that he did pass away, but he was in that, and it was really good.
I know that, yeah. And he's a good actor, and I thought Patrick Stewart was all right in it. You know, there were elements of the movie that weren't bad, but on the whole, it had a decent enough concept. I was just really expecting more out of it. It kept alluding to the idea that like, yeah, oh man, things are really going to get crazy now. And then like, they just very slowly did not. And then when they finally did, it was like, well, Jesus Christ, I've been edged so many times here. I don't know. Like I'm just done. So I don't know, but maybe a second watch will, again, prove me a fool.
Maybe. But there are actually a lot of Greens that do kind of suck. I got to hand it to you. Like Green Lantern with Ryan Reynolds sucks. Seth Green sucks. Ava Green, I mean, she's all right. The Green Mile was a great movie.
Green Mile is definitely an exception here. I thought the Green Mile was fantastic. I think my hot take, I think the Green Mile was better than Shawshank Redemption.
I will agree with you on that one. And then you have Green Book, which was the one where you have the white guy driving the black guy around.
Mahershala Ali. I like that guy a lot.
Yeah, Green Book I heard was all right. I think it won Best Movie, didn't it? And then there's another movie called The Green Knight, which is one of those A24 movies. I'm looking forward to seeing when it comes out.
Yeah, A24 movies have been pretty solid, but I think that's because they're just throwing everything at the wall. Like I've seen more A24 movies in terms of like up and coming studios. I feel like they've been they're in their Lil Wayne during Carter 3. Yeah, Lollipop, the Carter 3. They're in like their Lil Wayne, the Carter 3 phase where they're just like, they're everywhere. And it's like, Jesus, like what do these people sleep?
Yeah, they're good until they become Blumhouse, and then it all downhill from there.
That's the worry.
It's because they're working with smaller budgets. It's funny, right? When you have a smaller budget, you'll make a better movie. But then once you get the big budget, they tend to suck. Like there are some very high budget movies that are really good, but if you have a lower budget movie, you really try to make a good film, because at the end of the day, you're trying to get a bigger budget for another movie. Like everyone should just get smaller budgets so that they're always trying to make a good movie.
They have to be a little more creative, ironic. And they can't just pander to they can't just have a list of tropes that have tested well with focus audiences. You know, it's kind of the same thing as like a supergroup. I look at the supergroups, for example, are a good comparison to make, because you know, you get a regular group. Look at a band like Audioslave, for example. Now, Audioslave is just kind of the first one that comes to mind, and they were fine. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate Audioslave, and I love Chris Cornell. Chris Cornell, I think, is one of the most underrated vocalists of all time. But you look at Soundgarden, where Chris Cornell came from, right? And Chris Cornell was the standout talent of Soundgarden. But you know, and then you look at Rage Against the Machine, all very good musicians. Tom Morello, fantastic guitarist. And it's like you have all these ingredients to bake the perfect cake. So you take Chris Cornell, he's the best part of Soundgarden. And then you take Tom Morello in the band from Rage Against the Machine, right? And they were so forward thinking and pioneers with the sounds that, you know, Tom Morello could make out of his guitar and everything else. And then you put them together and the product is just like not actually that great. And it's like, you know, I mean, like it was fine, but it's less than the sum of its parts. And I feel like a lot of these really big budget movies, and the same thing with video games, a lot of the big budget video games nowadays, I mean, they just play like a major motion picture anyway. It's all quick time events. Like, you know, I'll press X to advance the plot. And yeah, these big budgets, and you get a whole collaborative team of people involved because they have to make sure it's a financial success. And I feel like they compromise the first place they'll make compromises is in the story where it's like, all right, we don't want to go too far with that. Like this is a little bit radical. And with a band, a super group, they don't necessarily want to experiment because it's like, oh, well, we work together to make money because we're all the best at our craft. And so we should just stick to what we do. And they don't really want to think outside the box when it comes to big stuff like that.
Going back to, some ironic stuff, and I'll leave you with a thought. So Biden is making all federal workers get vaccinated. That was, I guess, part of his mandate. What are your thoughts on him coming back out to the public light? I know that's kind of scary for Democrats every time he gives a speech, but if he comes back to the public light and says anybody that wants to collect public assistance, unemployment checks, and welfare and food stamps need to get vaccinated. What are your thoughts on that? So the people who don't want to work, they all have to get vaccinated. Why don't we have something like that? Why force vaccination on the people who want to work and who are federal workers getting a check, who are putting their 40 plus hours in a week? Why don't we force people who are just staying at home to get vaccinated? Why won't he do that?
I guess, well, I would argue that it's probably the same reason why, it's not really, yeah, I would have to.
Why go after the people working first?
I feel like that's the arguments for that are kind of maybe listing in a neocon direction. I would say that if you're gonna, I don't know, historically it's been a pretty bad precedent when you make people of disaffected, when you make people of communities that are already impoverished, or the idea of people who are on food stamps and things like that. And I used to have all ideas about that too, back when I was a more right-leaning person. But I've since come to look at the data, and I realized that when you make a precedent where they're the people who are kind of subject to the whim of what happens with the government, they're almost kind of.
Let me ask you: do you think they would put up a fight, and if they weren't getting their money,
yeah, I do
fight a little bit.
I do because I mean, ultimately, if they'd fight for the same reason that people going back to work would fight, or it boils down to a bodily autonomy thing. You can't just say that just because somebody survives off government assistance or is aided greatly by government assistance, that therefore the government is their boss and the government has a de facto control over everything that goes on within their life. I think that's one of the things.
So couldn't one argue though,
progressives are trying to get away with.
But now, couldn't I say, as a taxpayer, because I do pay my fair share of taxes, and I'm pretty sure my tax money does go towards certain programs. And if the government is, now luckily I'm not on the list where I need to be mandated yet. I won't go to restaurants in New York City if they don't want me. I mean, I say fuck most restaurants in New York City because they're overpriced anyway. So I'm okay not going to any of those places. So I don't really need it yet. So I'm not under a mandate of having to get vaccinated. But let's just say I was. Let's just say I am a federal worker and I have a choice to make and I have a lifestyle. I'm now forced to get it because I can't lose my job. So shouldn't I say, as a taxpayer now, I don't want to pay for any welfare, food stamps, any public assistance, public housing, if they're not vaccinated. So I don't want to pay my taxes if they're not going to be forced to get it too. I mean, they're not working, and if they choose not to get it, it's their body, but they're not being mandated to get it, to collect money from what I'm actually working for and then paying back to the government to hand out to them.
But I understand your point there, but what you're kind of what you're promoting there is the idea of like a prison sex mentality, where it's like, oh, well, I got fucked and now I'm going to fuck you. And it's like, I don't know that that is necessarily the best way to go about it, because that's kind of reactionary politics, and that is not typically the best way forward, I don't think. Although I understand having consternation regarding that. I think the better thing to do is just say that if it should, again, boil down to bodily autonomy, and you should be able to make a decision with your own body.
I think the government's afraid to make that mandate. because I have a feeling when it comes to people who get free stuff, they're more willing to put up a fight than somebody
Sure.
who's working. And I know that's a pretty fucked up thing to say, but I almost think federal workers should put up a fight, and
They absolutely
won't, but they should. And I think any worker working for a company that mandates it, and if you choose not to, should put up a little bit of a fight. It's interesting because I think also part of the mandate is anybody that has 100 employees or more, right? And what I find really funny, so I'm on LinkedIn, there's people posting, oh, do you work for a company that has 100 plus employees? Don't want to get vaccinated? Well, work for us because we're a small company.
There you go. That's the innovation of capitalism right there. Always finding a way to skirt the rules.
Right?
That's that spirit we were talking. That's that entrepreneurial spirit that really founded the nation.
I mean, listen, I wish it would fuck big businesses, but I think Biden should figure out another way to fuck big business. But he won't. You know why? Because the one thing he didn't forget is
well,
where
here's
his
how you do it,
are.
right? Well, that's very true. But I think the way you do it is, okay, if you're a big business and you're not subject to that mandate, then you should have to pay a tax that goes towards an oversight committee that has to make sure that all the smaller businesses do get vaccinated.
But isn't that a retaliatory?
Sure, in a way. But also there are better candidates of my defense than a corporation the size of, say, McDonald's. They've got their own lawyers. They can figure it out.
Well, McDonald's is going to be an interesting one because McDonald's is a franchise. And remember, each McDonald's is owned by an individual. So I don't think McDonald's is actually going to be under that 100 plus employee rule, surprisingly.
Really?
You got to think about it. There's so many corporations, right? But some of these corporations are owned as franchises and individually owned.
Imagine that.
So therefore, so like Chick-fil-A, I can own a Chick-fil-A, but I'll probably only have 20 employees that are in my Chick-fil-A.
That is the kind of thing you would hope that if there were going to be a mandate that it would stipulate that also, like if you're, facing with the public, even if your store or whatever, even if your establishment only has like maybe say 30 employees, right? That if you're interfacing with the general public, you'd like to think that in keeping consistent, it would say, so anybody who deals with the general public also has to get vaccinated. But yeah, if they don't have something like that,
everyone deals with the general public. I even deal with the general public, and yet I'm home.
I mean, you have the option to limit it though, right?
I think food service in general should be mandated to wear masks. And I think that would save everyone. That right there alone would fix everything. Everyone that deals with fucking food, wear a goddamn mask. And you know what? We'll have a problem because Robitussin won't be selling anymore. So now they're going to come up with some bullshit so that people need to start rubbing tussin on their wounds again. But no, seriously, a Dunkin' Donuts probably doesn't have to follow the mandate, but Starbucks will. Starbucks is owned by Starbucks, and everyone is compensated by Starbucks probably. So they definitely have 100 more employees. But, Mr. Patel, who owns 3 Dunkin' Donuts, he may only have 50 or 60 employees, and they're probably not paid by Dunkin'. They're probably owned by 123 Corp. So 123 Corp only has 60 employees. Right. Like Domino's Pizza is not owned by Domino's. There are individuals who own Domino's, and Domino's isn't who pays the individuals. It's ABC Corp who pays the individuals. All these people who we think are going to be mandated to get vaccinated, they're really not. They don't need to be. But there's so many people who are going to be like, oh, that means everywhere I go, oh, McDonald's, oh, Dunkin' Donuts, they're going to be forced to get vaccinated. It's not true.
It's true. Yeah, I would. I think that is a very good point to make, and I would like to think, although I can't say that I do think, but I would like to think that there would be the necessary verbiage that would make it so that there is no exemption like that under such a mandate, if such a mandate were to actually pass.
So you support the mandate?
No, I'm just saying that if that mandate were to pass, that I would hope that there weren't a way for big business to exploit a loophole in it and come out on top again, because that was the whole thing with the economic shutdown. When everybody was under lockdown, all big business thrived because everybody was scrambling to get labeled an essential business, and immediately all the major food chains were able to go out there and proclaim that they were essential businesses. And meanwhile, everybody's hometown restaurants shit the bed because they weren't able to do that. And it's like, I think the wound that they sustained is going to be obvious for a while. So I would like to see, if a bill like that were to pass and the government were to get involved, that maybe they do so in a way that's a little more responsible, so that it's not something that can be exploited to the profit of big business at the cost of small business again. Because think about it, that's the other side of the thing too. If a small business where people aren't necessarily mandated to get vaccinated, then what's to stop your, affluent middle class person who's like, well, I know that vaccine good and everything else bad. And oh, look, this local restaurant of mine, I like to support my community, but no vaccine, so bad, can't go to them. And like, oh, well, they went out of business. Well, that's because they didn't mandate it or something. And then meanwhile, the McDonald's down the street is thriving, and they're able to just exploit the same kind of legislation again. That's what I hope doesn't happen, because that would be essentially just as bad as another lockdown. And that would really, I think, catapult the economic state of this country into a very bad spot. What we need is a way to not funnel money directly into big corporations this time around.
I don't think there's going to be another lockdown. No matter what. Listen, cases are up 300% or something like that. So there's not going to be another lockdown. Everything is staying open. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Everything's going to be open.
Everything's going to be open. But what I'm saying is that this essentially is labeling things as being vaccinated or non-vaccinated. And it almost is kind of like the lockdown, wherein, it'll be up to the consumer at this point to decide. But being that a lot of the country is in favor of the vaccine, or that a lot of the country is not, whatever. But whatever the mandate stipulates is going to affect people's decisions. A lot of people are going to make decisions about what establishments they frequent based on what the mandate stipulates. And so I do think that has the potential to be really damaging to small business if it's done incorrectly, if it's managed incorrectly,
Well, I really hate to break it to you, but the decision was up to the consumer. We're fucked, because look at Amazon.
Well, that's true. Well, yeah, that is really true. Small business suffers under things like this.
If we're going to rely on the everyday consumer, they need to stop buying from Amazon and just figure out and buy somewhere else.
Right.
But they're not going to. So we can't rely on the consumer.
I do want to say, though, that the consumer gets a little bit of leeway. And here's why. I know in the one episode, I was very harsh on consumers, the one about planned obsolescence, where I was saying that, it's the fault of big business for always trying to get growing profits all the time. And, that kind of growth is unsustainable. But it's also partially the fault of consumers for wanting newer and better shit. And there is also convenience is commodified, and the average person is overworked and does not have the time to actually spend to go to, buy things at the corner bodega where they might be, a couple bucks more, things like that. Like it's tough. It's tough for most people to support small businesses simply because they don't have the financial means or even just the time to do so. So that is also something where I think the consumer gets a little bit of leeway, because big business is insidiously convenient. The local bodega doesn't have an app that you could just go on and boop, 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 and then it's just waiting at the front door. It's, and I'm not going to say those things aren't innovations, but those are things that you have to make a conscious effort to not give in to that sort of ease. And that's not something everybody has the luxury of doing.
You know who was not in the ear in 1985 when Bill Gates was talking to the person who wrote Handmaid's Tale and all that stuff? Was the person who created the drive-through. They did not bank on it because they gave it to everyone. Imagine patenting the drive-through.
Oh, yeah. That would have been huge.
Patenting the drive-through, the value of the drive-through.
The dog agrees.
This entire conversation was ironic. And these fucking dogs are going to start going. So I think it's just
it's dog time.
I think it's good.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess on that note, but we can call it dog.
Yeah, listeners, I think this podcast, you have a lot to think about and make some judgments for yourself. So I would say have a wonderful week. Football starts this week. So, I'll give you one lock that I think y'all going to make some money on this week. Just so you know, I'm going to say go. These are actually pretty fucking tough games. You're going to do a parlay with the Titans to cover -3. You're going to go with the Bengals money line, and you're going to go with the Carolina Panthers -4. I'm only kidding. That's a really shitty parlay. I'm not going to give anybody a bet this week. I'll worry about that next week. So tune in, everyone, because every week I'm going to give you a bet, except week 1.
You know
so
what?
we can see how the teams do.
What we should do in the spirit of friendly competition is I think I should do a bet that is the opposite of yours and see how it turns out.
That sounds like a great idea, everyone. Whenever I give you bets, do not follow. Talk to you soon, listeners. Enjoy your week. And please start sharing our show. We're still doing very well, but it's the same. All of you, it's the same of you listening. We need you to start sharing this a little bit, if you don't mind.
It's on you.
It's on you. We're almost at 1,000. Help us get to 1,000 in 2 weeks. If we get to 1,000 in 2 weeks, we'll continue. If we don't hit 1,000 in 2 weeks, we're done.
I don't think that. No, we're not done.
Yeah, Tom, we will. Come on. I just want to make people think that we win it so that they'd share it. But we're definitely going to hit 1,000 in 2 weeks.
Then yes, I was more afraid that we were done. I was going to say no. I have more to say.
No,
but
our friendship ends with this show.
Yeah. And then we just make our own individual podcast. It's like the Chris is a piece of shit still, starring Tom.
The Tom is an even bigger piece of shit, starring Chris. All right, unvaccinated. How you all doing today?
Oh God.
How you anti-abortionists doing?
And mine's like, hello, everybody. And then I'm like, well, wait, hang on. Okay, so when I say everybody, I don't actually mean everybody. Like, it's just an entire episode where I make like 2 points and then backtrack the rest of the time.
You're like, all right, vaccinators. How many babies did you abort this week?
Everybody got their tally.
Yeah, right. Oh, Monica is the winner. She's 2 for this year.
And Chris is like, all right, the first 10 listeners to call in and tell me their favorite rap song gets a free box of ivermectin.
Listen, everybody, rat on the abortioners. We get 10,000 a pop.
Oh, man. Dude, that is fucked, though, that they would incentivize it that way. Because right now, money like that is an extreme incentivizer. And I feel like that amount of money would drive people who weren't necessarily in favor of it, but like, didn't really care. I feel like anybody who was sort of in the middle on it or undecided sided with the money. And that is fucked up.